All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We are down to our final session of the day, and it's going to be a great one. Up next, I have Don Williams and Dezyanian from Empathy, leading a session called Man versus Model, Human-Centered Thinking in Modern Media Mix Modeling. They'll be walking us through how marketing measurement is evolving and why keeping the human element in our analytics is more important than ever. As always, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Don and Mo will do their best to get to them at the end of their presentation. Let's dive in. Mo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Max. Thanks everyone for attending this session. I know it's the last one of the day, so we'll try to make it fun. The original title of this was the original title was MMM, a delicious conversation, but I believe that got vetoed by literally everybody. So we're with a human-centric approach to media mix modeling. My name is Dezyanian. I run a media agency called Empathy. We are very proud to be supporting the AMA's Marketing Leadership Week for, I believe, 4 or 5 years in a row now. And with me, I have our head of data and analytics, Don Williams. And we're going to talk to you about marketing mix modeling and how to, what tools are available out there, and how to select a good one for your organization. Right on. So a little bit about today. I'll go through the agenda and then I'll pass it over to Don to give you some of the details. So we'll give you a bit of context about marketing mix modeling, bit of introduction, what it is, how it works, and we actually have pulled a platform comparison. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. It's a good starting list. We'll talk about building versus buying. We'll talk about some use cases. And we'll, at the very end, leave you with a checklist that you can take away and see how ready you are for marketing mix modeling. And finally, we'll be talking to you about a newer topic that is coming up, which is media mix modeling versus CMM, which is consumer mix models, which the sort of a media measurement framework, and we'll talk about the differences and how that works as well. Please type in your questions in the chat, and we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Thank you. Now for some context, over to Don. Immediately unmute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mo. I think the topic of MMM sometimes can be a bit complex, and oftentimes there's so many different ways to explain it. So your interest in this topic could have come from different perspectives. I want to simplify it today in terms of, first of all, defining what MMM is. So my attempt is to be less about technical jargons and try to simplify the definition, the approach, how we view MMM. So the first simplified way of explaining MMM, think of it as reverse engineering a recipe. So you have the ingredients, you want to find out, why did this particular food taste as good as it is, or it didn't taste as good as I think. So MMM, what it tries to do, it tries to determine based on your media spend across channel, what is their impact on a performance metric such as sales, which is the most important thing in marketing. And then it looks at each channel contribution. It then breaks it down in terms of what's the incremental contribution of each channel, and then how can I optimize my media spend based on the parameters that are part of my marketing media mix. What it also incorporates is the environment. So market conditions like the economy. It looks at your competitors. It looks at baseline. It tries to isolate baseline impact, such as if you didn't spend $1 on marketing, what would be your sales? So very simple. So kind of like start with why MMM? Well, MMM has been around since 1950s. It got a bit more prominence in the 80s. And then for a while, there was a bit of a lull in terms of MM. But then the attribution crisis came about with iOS 14.5. There was also continuous pressure on from CEOs on, why is half of my budget wasted? How can I optimize my budget? And then there are issues around, how best can we measure impact of certain channels. Let's look at offline versus online. But the advantage of MMM is that it's privacy safe, it's channel agnostic in terms of insight. So it allows you to kind of see the impact of each channel at the high level. Next slide. So, I gave a definition of what MMM is. The important point to be made here is that you can see the impact across channels. It's finance friendly, which if you went back to the 80s, where you would require millions of dollars before you can actually measure the impact of channels. And then the focus is always being privacy safe. So think of the ability to look at time and over using historical data to understand what is the impact of your marketing dollars by channel. Next slide. So this is just to provide you with kind of an overview of what's out there in terms of comparison. So you might have heard MMM from different perspective, from companies who provide MMM as a service, from media agencies like ourselves, in-house. There is the foundational approach is the same. The difference is how it's delivered and how it's developed. So there are popular models that are open source, like Robyn from Meta. Then there's the Google Meridians. Those are Meridian. That's a popular model. And then there's some new models that have they've recently come to market that they incorporate more advanced tools, but they're built on the same foundation. So if you look at the range of MMM models, from open source to in-house models, they kind of gravitate towards the same baseline. They're trying to look at the impact of channel. They're trying to look at the marginal contribution by channel. They're also trying to incorporate what we call ad stock, which is some measure of the impact of your creative. And importantly, they provide some budget allocation tools. So you can run simulation to say, okay, if I shift my spending across channel or reduce or increase channel, spending, what would be my impact on sales? So this serves just as a comparison to what options are available out there. Obviously, it will depend on what your objectives are in terms of what tool you would select. We'll talk about an operating model that highlight how to approach operationalizing. Next slide. So just to continue from the previous slide, you have two decisions to make as a marketer. Are you going to build MMO or are you going to buy it? There are different pros and cons around building and buying. So let's highlight some of the pros. Building in-house MMM, whether it's open source or your own data science team, is a long-term investment. The con against that is it requires strong technical skills. So even though Robyn's Meta model is open source, it requires a lot of technical skills for you to operationalize it. However, it gives you a bit more customization, a bit more flexibility that comes with store to set up and to maintain. You have full control over data and the model logic. So with new improving techniques, you can actually make some adjustment within the MM model, but that needs internal resources and that requires technical skills. The alternative is buying, which is like the vendor solution. So going to the like an off the shelf solution that provides faster time to value. It includes vendor support and maintenance. You can scale well with non-technical teams. So if you don't have an internal technical team, you can scale with a vendor solution. There are some cons against that, which is obviously costs, because you have to pay ongoing subscription. It's less customizable because you're buying off-the-shelf solution, and you also might be locked into a vendor ecosystem. So if you're trying to shift away from one model to the next, it could require a bit of investment to move from one vendor to the next. Next slide.
One thing to add here is as with every sort of technology and solutions, this is about resourcing, and this is about sort of your internal staffing needs. What has happened in the media mix world over the past, let's say, 5 years or so, with the advent of AI, the speed and accessibility of these models has drastically increased, right? So, which basically means what used to take a long time and the processing power that it took, it's become a lot more accessible. You need fewer and fewer deeper sort of expertise to make these models work. And there's enough solutions out there that seem very accessible to a lot of mid-sized marketers, right? Now, but what that means, though, is for any sort of marketing manager or CMO who's looking to build these types of solutions, who's looking to measure marketing communications, it's important to bridge the gap between sort of what's technically possible really quickly to what the business needs. And oftentimes what we find in our experience is that that bridge is what is the key component and what breaks down oftentimes in a marketer's discussion, where sure, you can build a tool or buy a tool or anything else that you'd like, however which way you engage the solution to get the answers. But if you don't have the right folks to translate what those tools sort of output into real business outcomes and real business strategies, that's where it sort of falls short. And then that's where the discussion around whether you build or buy almost doesn't matter, because it's as long as you have the capabilities to strategize around a media mix model, because that's all it is. It's a tool to measure your effectiveness. It doesn't have all of the answers all the time. As long as you have the right staffing needs for that, whether that's in-house or through a partner or through a vendor or however that you want to work that, we find that is often the missing component of that. Over to you, Don.
That's a very good point. And it segues really nicely into how do you make this work? So this is based on our experience. Kind of give you a quick background. Over the past 2 years or so, I think with the advent of AI, there's a bit more solutions or options available, even within the range of buy and or build in-house. And oftentimes the decision to be made is whether or not I try to buy first, then I build in-house after. I think what's important in terms of answering the question, which is really the question that's been asked, how to allocate my marketing spend, is where do I start? So the first place is obviously data. You want to ensure that you have that data in order for you to measure. MMM requires or relies on historical data. And the rule of thumb is at least 2 years of data, because that provides you with baseline numbers to predict the future, to understand the past, and then to predict the future. Then the second part of the approach is, what method do you choose? So even within the general framework of an MMM, which is based on multi-regression or linear regression, there are various techniques that you can use as depending on the complexity of your marketing operations. The third is around insight. So clearly, and I think again from experience, there's always a question of why, what's happening, how is it happening, where, what channel. And so the challenge in answering all the questions is, where do you start? So with MMM, again, at the top line level, it answers those questions, but it's based on probability. So it's not deterministic, meaning there's always a range of how you interpret insights. And we have questions from clients who will ask, but can you provide me with the details of why this campaign performed better than this other campaign? So you have to be clear in terms of what's the scope of, what's the reliance on MMM, and how much of reliance are you going to place on the model itself to make that overall marketing decision. And then fourthly, which is where oftentimes smaller companies are a bit at a disadvantage, is a rhythm. Like, how often do we update this? And when we say the rhythm, it has to fit within market operations. If you can't adjust more than 2 times a year your marketing campaign tactically, then it doesn't make sense to update the model 4 times a year. So it's important to ensure that whether it's your in-house marketing team or your ad agency that you work with, that you can fit the results or the overall insights from MMM into your operations. So we tend to go with biannual or sometimes often quarterly. Slide. So this is the key question that we face, or we get asked: how to use MMM? How are we going to use this tool? This tool is, it's used by large companies, the Unilevers of the world, Pepsi of the world, Coca-Cola. We're a smaller agency or a smaller marketer. How are we going to use this? So we see this as kind of like 4 ways to look at this. So it informs your top of the funnel, TOEFL, top of the funnel, versus your bottom of the funnel planning. So it allows you to kind of see at a high level, based on how you define your media mix, understanding what drives at the top of the funnel or at the bottom of the funnel, which is where it gets closer to making conversions. And then obviously, importantly, channel reallocation, because you want to be able to optimize your media spend. And then thirdly, it support your finance and marketing alignment, because oftentimes the guys who write the check are not the guys who actually make decisions on marketing. And then the outputs that you use to help you guide your marketing at a strategic and tactical level are what we call waterfalls charts. It's really just show you the impact across channel. And then finally within that output is you can look at output. You can look at scenario simulations. So you can test different scenarios in terms of media mix across time. Next slide. So importantly, what we need is a MMM readiness checklist. And these are some of the key questions. In the interest of time, I won't go in all the questions, but from a data perspective, you want to have good quality data. And then importantly, these questions allow you to determine, are you ready for MMM? Maybe you need to move to the next stage of preparing your data. And then importantly, it allows you to understand, should you engage a vendor in terms of building or build your own. Just to pause to give a bit more time on the slide.
Yeah, let's give it a pause. And Max, we'll be sending these to the attendees, or at least a recording of it too.
Yep.
We're moving to the next slide. So Mo is going to pick up from here, the more interesting stuff.
Lots of words on the slide, but there's this other other concept that is referred to as a CMM, which is cross media measurement. I think I got the acronym incorrect at the beginning of the presentation. Is my apology. But this is sort of a something that's been talked about a lot in the industry, at least in the media industry. It's a global open source sort of developed framework by the WFA, and it is coming to Canada, administered through the ACA, I believe, which basically tries to define reach and frequency, particularly reach numbers, through deduplicated reach from media. So if somebody sees Facebook ads or TV ads, is it the same person that's sort of watching those ads? And how many people are we actually legitimately reaching through media? So a unified central measurement for your media investments, to be able to quantify your media investments. I have heard, and we have heard through clients and through the industry, that some folks think that a CMM or a cross media measurement is some sort of a replacement for a media mix model. But we wanted to highlight this here. You're going to hear a lot about this in the news over the next couple of years. This has been a pilot that's been implemented in the UK and the US as well. And it will be happening in Canada too. It's a great initiative. But those two things don't have a replacement relationship. Those are two complementary tools. And we'll explain how in a second. Essentially, a cross-media measurement tool has a focus on reach and frequency. We're trying to answer how many people did we realistically reach with our media? How many unique people do we reach? Versus in a media mix model, we're trying to find the impact of that reach on marketing, right? A CMM uses things like census data, panels, and all of those things, versus a media mix model is really a statistical analysis, right? It's basically a statistical methodology. Media mix models typically look back, as we said. It's sort of like a look back into history. There is simulation tools that use them, can predict some of future outcomes, but for the most part, it's a statistical model of the past. CMM tools are more real-time and short-term and future-looking. And really, the biggest thing that I want to take you folks to take away from this is that this deduplicated reach, this cross-media measurement, is a really great input for a media mix model, but they're not the same thing. And we see that a lot of marketers are conflating those two things in the market right now. And we just kind of want to say that you should watch out for that. A good, accurate reach number makes for a better media mix model and a better output. But it's not a replacement for that. So that's sort of the really big takeaway from this presentation. And that's something that we'll be hearing about a lot in the coming months and years through the ACA and through the WFA and all of those folks. That is it for our portion of the presenting piece, but we're happy to open it up for questions.
Yep, thank you, Mo. And we have lots of questions in the chat. I'll start with the first one. What defines MMM as different from just marketing-specific econometrics? And how does marketing philosophy influence the adjudication, of regression analysis?
It's a very, it's probably one of the most common questions. Why is it, how is MMM different from every other thing that's out there? I think if you go back to the history of MMM, which is from the 1950s, which means it's been around for a long time, the big problem that marketers faced was allocation, like determining, I would say, explaining what channel drives sales. So the techniques used by MMM are comes from the different blocks of techniques that are used that helps to define or determine the model itself. So regression analysis is part of it. So your question around regression analysis, how is it different? It's part of the core part of MMM is to look at the correlation between your marketing spend by channel and your sales. So that's part of regression analysis. Another important part of MMM, which has been more introduced within new MMM tools, are what they call log linear, which means how do you estimate the impact of certain events that doesn't necessarily have a direct relationship in terms of time to sales. And then the third is ad stock, which has taken a bit more prominence in terms of if I have a probability-based estimation of my ad stock, meaning the effect of my ad on sales, how do I model it over time? And so by channel, there are differences between, let's say, Meta's impact on sales. If so, let's take a step back. If someone sees an ad, and just to be clear, MMM is not determined at the person's level, but it's from a probability-based perspective. If someone sees an ad, its impact will be less over time. So that's where it brings in what we call saturation. So these are different techniques that's used within MMM to kind of allow you to test incrementality, which means for every dollar spent on a channel, what is my return? And also the ability to simulate. So bringing in new machine learning techniques, the advent of a bit more processing power, you can run multiple simulations that allows you to test different hypotheses. So if I reduce my spend on Meta, for example, by 20%, what's the impact on sales? So again, these are different ways to incorporate the improvement that MMM has brought to bear in terms of applying it in the real world.
Thank you, Don. I'm moving to the next question. Discussions in the chat actually suggest that MMM is good for big companies. Is that true? And if so, what is another solution for smaller scale companies?
So maybe more will answer part of this, but I wouldn't. I mean, if you look at this 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that would apply. Now, if you look at how we work with clients, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a big company. I mean, again, what is big? So, how do you define big? So if you look at companies spending $5 million on on marketing spend versus $500 million, MMM models can, at smaller budgets, still provide value. So it's important to understand how we're going to utilize the model itself, and also recognize some of the limitations around data.
I think the question ultimately, and without making a big an overpromise on this, but I think ultimately it comes down to fidelity. So you can get more sort of the more data you have and the more spending you have in marketing, the more you're evaluating, the more high fidelity your analysis becomes. The less of that you have, the less granularity you get. The more rough or choppier the analysis becomes, the higher the confidence interval. So you end up with a lot of ranges. So for what it is worth, and it's difficult to sort of put discrete and deterministic numbers to these to say if you spend this much, then this works. If you spend less, because it's not that clear cut. But if you use things like other industry averages, if you use things like ranges instead of final numbers, and if you honor the use case of a media mix model versus trying to find every answer using a simple tool, then no, you're right. It's only for large companies. But if you kind of honor all of those things, then it can have use cases for quote unquote smaller budgets too. But what is small? That's again something to be determined. But what is happening in the market, and that's should go shouldn't go unsaid, is that these tools are becoming more and more accessible. It used to be, again, 20 years ago or or even 10 years ago, that you'd have to hire a bunch of software developers and build it out and make the thing, and it became this big consulting project. These days, there are tools that you can subscribe to. Are they as accurate or as clean or as customizable as building something? No, but for a smaller brand, they may give you a directional pointer towards how you should invest your dollars. And oftentimes that's better than what we have currently, which is sort of a lot of instinct and a lot of guesswork. The one other thing that I will mention is, Max, and this is very, very important in our context of media management, is that what the accessibility of media mix modeling has been able to do for us, and has done for a lot of brands and a lot of our clients, is weed out a lot of the fraudulent activity in media, right? Because when you buy media and when there's a lot of impressions and there's a lot of big inflated numbers that you get back from a lot of sort of media activity, but if you can't reasonably correlate that to a business outcome at the back end of it, then the question remains to be asked is not just how effective was the media, but what is the waste, fraud, and abuse in that media? We've talked about this with the AMA before, and folks who know me on this call know that I'm a big proponent of clean media, and seeing through the fog of the digital magic hoopla and the programmatic stuff that's usually out in the market. We typically make a very big about that at Empathy and with our clients, and tools like this enable us to really point our finger to, this looks big on paper, but this didn't work. And that's an issue we need to address. So, we can talk about all media fraud all day, but at the end of the day, if I'm buying something for a client, a number of impressions or a bunch of eyeballs or ears to listen to, and I can't produce a business outcome with that at the end of the day, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the month, whatever, that shouldn't happen, right? That's never a good conversation a CMO should be having with their CFO. And tools like that enable us to pinpoint where that waste, fraud, and abuse is happening. And I think that's important.
Thank you, Mo. Next question is about attribution crisis. Would you say that MMM is now superior to attribution-based marketing, or is the game still reclaiming what was lost?
I can actually take that too, Don, if you don't mind. So the attribution crisis has been happening for a number of years now, right? So with privacy regulations, with cookies going away, one of the things we say often is the people who make our phones don't want us to track them. The people who regulate our phones, the government doesn't want any tracking. There's privacy regulations everywhere. The people who make the software inside those phones don't want us to be tracked. The people who serve the ads, like the Metas and the Googles, they don't want to share the info with everybody else. Yet we have this sort of notion in marketing that we can successfully attribute and track people and personalize people, personalize our ads towards people at scale. And it is our position at Empathy and my position in general that personalization in advertising, not in marketing. And I hope that all 47 attendees of this webinar understand the difference between advertising and marketing. But it is my position that when it comes to advertising, personalization is not desirable and not a good thing to do. So attribution, using all of those technologies like cookies and OS and all of that, has not been a really reliable method for many, many years. However, in its limited use case, it has some functionality. If you are evaluating on the ground campaign level in platform, 2 different A/B tests of a creative, yes, probably an attribution model is the way to go. A media mix model is a little bit too broad to answer those questions for you. So if you are, for those of us on the call who are media buyers, who have hands and fingers on keyboards, are doing day-to-day stuff, attribution model can guide your tactical day-to-day very well, knowing and understanding that it is a very, very rough tool, right? So an attribution model is sort of like, it's like measuring a distance by walking it. You can kind of like, walk your feet on and get it, but it's not a tape measure, right? It doesn't have that accuracy. You can kind of guess how many feet from here to there that wall is. It might be good enough for making rough decisions, but it's not an accurate enough tool. So that's our position, right? It's great for day-to-day little stuff, but if you want bigger answers of advertising, not marketing, difference here, then you should really look at incrementality testing, media mix models, and more sophisticated tools.
Thank you, Mo. And I do have a follow-up question since we're talking about AI all day. Where do you see AI role in improving MMM models? Can AI help us bridge the gap between data fidelity and speed of the insight, or is it more of like wishful thinking?
Well, it has the entire paradigm that media mix models have become more accessible in the past couple of years has been AI driven. Like what has made MMMs more accessible is sort of this resurgence of AI. A lot of these tools use some sort of AI sort of analysis or simulation in order to analyze and run these in like large iterations of simulations. Those are the things that weren't possible or weren't accessible at least. Were possible, but just not very accessible. So what really AI is doing here, it's providing insights, it's providing speed, it's providing accuracy, and it's providing analysis. We are still not there, and we vet quite a few of these tools all the time at our shop. We're quite not at the point where we can just sort of hand off the data to an AI system and just ask it questions and it gives us something. I think a lot of these tools still require quite a bit of intervention, human intervention, interpretation to contextualize for the business. But that might be a future where we get to pretty quickly, where we just ask a question: what should I do this quarter? And it gives me good. We have the tools, we can do that. The answers just aren't good enough right now.
Yeah, I also wanted to add too, because I think there's this perception that when we say AI, it's new. I mean, there's parts of AI that's been around, since the 80s, early 2000s. I think what in particular LMMs do at this point is allow you to focus a lot more on the insights portion. So looking at the output from LMM, what does this mean? And if you're trying to operationalize part of your marketing team, there is some advantage or some benefits of utilizing that insights functionality that AI provides. So you see, it's important to kind of deconstruct the benefits of AI, as opposed to just like you focus on one part of AI because there are different range of what benefits that AI brings. But this could be another 1 hour topic for discussion.
Thank you, Don. And thank you, Mo. Next question, since we started talking about future, what do you think is the next frontier for solving attribution in a cookieless, privacy-first world?
So
It's
attribution in the cookie. So I don't think so let me rephrase the question. I don't think our obsession with measurement in marketing is favoring us and setting us up into the future. Because what we're fundamentally lacking, even with media mix models, is this notion that we can measure. We can measure a lot of things in marketing. There is in my conversations with CMOs over the past couple of years, not once as a CMO, and we've done a lot of research on this too, not once as a CMO say, oh, you know what I need? More data. Nobody has said that. Nobody needs more things to measure. What we lack is sort of just making context from all of our data. And I think this is where my hope is. And that's a part and parcel. There's two things here. One is just contextualizing all that up. What needs to be measured, what requires measurement, and what's good for the business. And then the second part to that is the measurement horizon, not marketing, but businesses in general is sort of stuck in this quarter by quarter execution time frame. And oftentimes what happens with attribution or measurement, the thing that falls short quite often or hurts us as marketers is that we must measure things on a very short time period because that's how a business operates, right? Budgets are set on the quarterly basis or an annual basis. Things happen in faster paces. But my hope is that the future of attribution solves for this long-term time horizon problem that we have, and media mix models do some of that for sure, and there's a lot of good tools that do that. But I don't think that problem is necessarily solved in the boardrooms yet, right? Quite often marketers still question, they still have to fight for brand dollars versus performance dollars, even with a lot of media mix models and a lot of measurement tools and all the data in the world, right? So my hope is that the future in this cookieless world for attribution is a world where not only can we see marketing's effect right now, we can see it quarters and years into the future, and we can quantify it with enough scientific rigor that it carries a weight in boardrooms where we don't have to fight for every brand dollar and get all the brand dollars cut when there's economic headwinds and everything goes back to sort of performance and sales and how many sales did we make this week or today or this hour, because that's the reality on the ground sometimes. Sure, the tools can do it, but it often doesn't happen that way.
I also have a perspective on this. I think we probably need to simplify it too, because we often throw tools and techniques at the problem, hoping that we can solve it. I think we got to go back to what are we trying to solve, and how can we, at least at a baseline level, provide some answers in terms of whether it's a cookieless or whatever happens in the future. How are we going to be able to influence or attract the right customers? And we have limited dollars. How can we allocate those dollars? And then we make that next decision in terms of, what customers that, we talk about customer journey, but how do we attract the right customers based on the right ads? Like if I think of it from our perspective, we've seen hundreds of ads in a day. Can we realistically understand what drives that decision in terms of an ad? So I think we gotta put, so to speak, less reliance on the tools and techniques and go back to the drawing board in terms of what can we influence.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Mo. And I have last question, appears to be in the chat. Can MMM suggest some media selections or just evaluate the previous performances?
It provides you with two, so there are two different, there are a couple of ways to look at it. It looks at, uses historical data to tell you why. Like kind of like based on your sales and your media spend, what drives sales by channel, like allocating by channel, how did this channel contribute to sales? In terms of the future, it allows you to simulate your budget spend and say, based on what we know in the past, can we forecast the future? I think it's important to note that even based on the forecast, you evaluate it against your existing campaign to say how good was this model in terms of how it forecasts sales. But again, importantly, this is at the top line level. It's strategic, it's directional, it's based on probabilities. So there's always a range of quote unquote accuracy around that forecast.
Thank you, Don. This appears to be last question. I'll turn it to the room and ask people if there are any questions left in the audience, please raise your hand so we can see you. If not, then we can wrap it up. Just giving a couple more seconds for people to react. And if there are no reactions, because it's been a long day, then we'll wrap it up.
I am also scrolling through the chats.
Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like you guys answered all the questions. Thank you so much for this great presentation, and thank you for diving us into what it really means to bring a human-centered approach to data and to measurement. Appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone who stayed the entire day with us. If you missed any sessions or want to rewatch anything, including this session, everything is going to be available through Participant Hub a little bit later tonight. And we'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning with reminders and links to day 2 lineup. Whether you're joining us virtually tomorrow or you're attending Sharifa Khan's workshop in person, we hope you'll continue conversations, connect with speakers, whether on LinkedIn or via Participant Hub or Participant app. Feel free to share your thoughts, your questions, your insights. Share more news about the conference. We still keep the registration open, so if you know anyone who would be interested in participating in an in-person day, they can still register for Wednesday events. Thank you again, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful day.